The late morning sun of early autumn cast long, gentle shadows across Beatrice Vance's garden. At 68, this was her sanctuary, a world she had curated with the same patient love she had applied to every other aspect of her life. Each rosebush, planted by her late husband Harold, was a living monument to a specific memory: the fiery red for their 25th anniversary, the pale pink for the day their daughter Sarah graduated medical school, the vibrant yellow for the birth of their first grandchild, Leo. Beatrice moved between them, her hands, clad in worn leather gloves, expertly snipping away dead leaves. The scent of damp earth and fading blooms was the scent of her history. Inside, the house was quiet. It was a silence she had grown accustomed to in the 5 years since Harold's passing, but she had never quite made peace with it. The silence was an absence, a space where his booming laugh or the sound of the television news used to be. She filled it now with the classical music station and the hum of the refrigerator. But it was a thin defense against the loneliness that could creep in during the quiet hours of the afternoon. Her true defense was the gallery of photographs on the mantelpiece. Her eyes drifted to the most recent one, a picture from last month's trip to the zoo with her grandchildren. 10-year-old Leo, serious and thoughtful, was pointing at a giraffe, his face lit with intellectual curiosity. 7-year-old Chloe, a firecracker of a girl with her grandmother's stubborn chin, was grinning madly, a smear of chocolate ice cream on her cheek. Beatrice's heart clenched with a love so fierce it was a physical ache. They were her reason, her anchor to the future. The bi-weekly visits from her son Richard and his family were the brightest points on her calendar, the promise that kept the silence at bay. She didn't hear the luxury sedan pull into the driveway. It wasn't until the doorbell chimed an hour earlier than expected that she felt a prickle of unease. Wiping her hands on her apron, she opened the door to find Richard and his wife Susan on her doorstep. Richard was dressed in a suit that looked a little too tight, his smile stretched and brittle. Susan stood slightly behind him, clutching her purse like a shield, her face a carefully blank mask. The children were not with them. "Richard! Susan! What a surprise!" Beatrice said, forcing a warm smile. "I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon. Where are the kids?" "They're with a sitter, Mom," Richard said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His eyes swept the living room, but not in the way a son looks at his childhood home. It was the cold, appraising gaze of an inspector. "We need to talk." Susan followed, her heels clicking nervously on the hardwood floor. "Babe, we were just so worried we couldn't wait." Beatrice's internal alarm, honed by decades of motherly intuition, began to ring loud and clear. She had noticed the strain in Richard's voice on the phone lately, the subtle deflections when she asked about his work. She had seen the tightness around Susan's eyes, the way her smile never quite seemed genuine. She knew they were under some kind of pressure, but she had assumed it was the normal stress of work and family. Now seeing them standing in her living room, their presence radiating a nervous, predatory energy, she felt a sudden, cold dread. "Worried? About what?" she asked, gesturing for them to sit, though they remained standing, a united front of manufactured concern. "About you, Mom," Richard began, launching into a speech that was obviously rehearsed. "This house, it's just too much. We noticed the paint peeling on the back porch last time we were here. And the mail? It's piling up. You seem overwhelmed, forgetful." Beatrice glanced at the small, neat stack of mail on her side table. It was not piled up. "I was just about to go through it, dear. I was in the garden." "That's what we mean," Susan interjected, her voice saccharine. "You spend so much time in that garden, you're letting the house go. It's not safe. What if you fell? Who would know?" A memory surfaced in Beatrice's mind, sharp and unwelcome. A conversation with Harold, years ago, when Richard had just been promoted at his first big job. "The boy's got ambition, Bea," Harold had said, concern clouding his face. "But he lacks foundation. He wants the house without laying the bricks. Watch out for that. A man who only values the destination will cut any corner to get there." Her husband had always seen their son with a clarity she had often tried to soften. She looked at Richard now, at the handsome man her son had become, and for the first time she saw the weakness Harold had warned her about. She saw the desperation behind his eyes. I am perfectly capable of managing my own home, Beatrice said, her voice quiet but firm. And my neighbors are wonderful. If I needed help, I would ask for it. This was not going according to their script. Richard's manufactured patience began to fray. He dropped the pretense of concern and moved to the heart of the matter. We don't think you are, Mom. That's the problem, he said, his tone hardening. We think you're in denial. Susan and I have been looking into options. We've found a wonderful senior apartment for you. It's a lovely one-bedroom, very secure, with on-site staff. All you have to do is sign the house over to us. We'll handle the sale, the movers, everything. We'll take this burden off your shoulders. The words, so casual, so audacious, landed in the quiet room like a detonated bomb. The silence that followed was thick with their meaning. Give us your home. Let us sell your life. Let us erase your history. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. It was worse than she could have imagined. This wasn't just a concern about her welfare. This was a coup. She clutched the back of a chair for support, a movement her son and daughter-in-law mistook for frailty. In reality, it was to steady herself against a tidal wave of fury and heartbreak. My home? She whispered, the words catching in her throat. You want me to leave my home? We want you to be safe, Susan said softly, as if speaking to a child. Beatrice's mind was racing, connecting the dots of their strained finances, their sudden, intense concern, their missing children. She saw the trap being laid for her. And in that moment of devastating clarity, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of her stomach. She thought of Harold's warning. She thought of the legacy they had built, not of money, but of love and hard work, all contained within these walls. And she thought of Leo and Chloe. She let her eyes fill with tears, summoning the image of their bright, smiling faces. She allowed her shoulders to slump, her body to curve into a posture of defeat. She would give them the performance they expected. But my grandchildren, she said, her voice breaking with a sob that felt both utterly false and deeply true. They love this house. Their tire swing is still in the backyard. What about them? Richard saw his opening. He moved in for the kill, his voice softening into a grotesque parody of compassion. This was the leverage, the final, brutal turn of the screw he had planned all along. That's the other part of this, Mom, he said, his eyes shining with false sincerity. This is how you can continue to see them. We need to know you're in a safe, stable environment. If you refuse to cooperate, if you insist on staying here in this big, deteriorating house where you're clearly not coping, then we can't, in good conscience, keep bringing the children here. It wouldn't be fair to them. The threat, unspoken but perfectly clear, hung between them. Sign over your house, or you will never see your grandchildren again. Beatrice stared at her only son, a stranger wearing his face, and felt a profound and terrible shift inside her. The loving, trusting mother was gone, and in her place a strategist was born. He thought he was delivering an ultimatum. He had no idea he had just handed her a declaration of war, and in doing so, had given her the only weapon she would ever need to win it. His own stunning, monstrous cruelty. She let out a small, shuddering gasp of what appeared to be horrified surrender. You wouldn't do that, she pleaded, even as she saw in his unblinking eyes that he absolutely would. We'll do what we have to do to protect you, Mom, he said gently. Beatrice nodded slowly, as if accepting the inevitable. I need a few days to think. Richard's relief was a physical thing, a sudden relaxation of his tense shoulders. He had won. He shot a triumphant, almost imperceptible glance at Susan. Of course, Mom, he said, his voice magnanimous now. Take the weekend. We'll come back on Monday. We'll bring all the paperwork. We'll make it as easy as possible. They left soon after, leaving Beatrice standing alone in the center of her living room, the echo of their false concern still hanging in the air. She remained motionless until the sound of their car faded down the street. Then, she walked to the mantelpiece and picked up the photograph of Leo and Chloe. She traced their smiling faces with her finger. "Oh, my darlings," she whispered to the photograph. "Your father has made a terrible mistake. But don't you worry. Grandma is going to fix it. She walked to the phone, her steps now firm and resolute. She pulled a small, worn address book from a drawer and flipped to the letter A. Her finger stopped on a name, Amelia Albright, Esquire. She had met the brilliant young lawyer through a friend at the library months ago and had been impressed by her sharp mind and fierce sense of justice. She had kept the number, a small just-in-case measure filed away. The case had now arrived. She dialed the number. When a calm, professional voice answered, Beatrice's own voice was clear and steady, devoid of any of the trembling weakness she had displayed for her son. "Miss Albright," she said, "my name is Beatrice Vance. I believe we have a mutual friend, Mrs. Peters from the library. I have a problem, and I have a feeling you're the right person to help me solve it. It concerns my son, my house, and the future of my grandchildren. Of course. Here is the next major installment of the expanded story, focusing on the meticulous planning and preparation for Beatrice's brilliant countermove. The next morning, Beatrice drove to Amelia Albright's downtown office. It was a sleek, modern space with glass walls and minimalist furniture, a world away from the comfortable clutter of Beatrice's home. Beatrice, however, did not look out of place. She entered not as a distraught victim, but as a woman with a purpose, carrying a large leather tote bag that had once belonged to Harold. Amelia met her in the reception area, her expression a careful mix of professionalism and compassion. "Mrs. Vance, I'm so glad you called. Please, come in. Can I get you some coffee or tea?" "Tea would be lovely, thank you," Beatrice said, following the young lawyer into a conference room with a sweeping view of the city. Once they were seated, Amelia began gently. "Beatrice, you mentioned on the phone that your son is pressuring you regarding your home. This is a situation we see far too often, unfortunately. It's a form of elder abuse, and we have several avenues we can pursue." Beatrice held up a hand, a gesture of polite interruption. "Ms. Albright, may I call you Amelia?" "Of course. Amelia, I appreciate your concern, but I have not come here today seeking sympathy or a standard defense. I've come for a weapon." From her tote bag, Beatrice retrieved a meticulously organized accordion file. She opened it on the polished table, revealing tabs for mortgage statements, credit card bills, business loans, and emails. Amelia's eyebrows shot up. "What is all this?" "This is my son's financial life," Beatrice explained calmly. "For the past year, I've had a growing suspicion that something was wrong. Richard has always been aspirational. He spends money he doesn't have to project an image of success. I've seen mail he's carelessly left behind, overheard snippets of panicked phone calls to his wife. I am not a spy, but I am an observant mother." She slid a document across the table. It was a notice of default on a significant business loan. He and a partner tried to launch a tech startup. It failed 6 months ago. He never told me. He took out a second mortgage on his own home to finance it. She pushed another paper forward. "And this is his latest credit card statement. A balance of over $50,000, with an interest rate that would make a loan shark blush. He is drowning, Amelia. This isn't about my well-being. This is his life raft, and he intends to build it from the planks of my home." Amelia stared at the documents, then back at the composed, steely-eyed woman across from her. Her initial assessment of the case shifted dramatically. This was not a confused, vulnerable woman being preyed upon. This was a queen, meticulously gathering intelligence on an invading army. "Beatrice," Amelia said, her tone now one of peer-to-peer respect, "this is incredibly thorough. This changes things. It shores up our position immensely if this goes to court." "I have no intention of letting this go to court," Beatrice stated. "A court battle would be long, public, and painful. It would irrevocably destroy what's left of my family and likely tarnish my grandchildren's image of their father forever. I want to avoid that. I want to end this on my terms, swiftly and decisively." "What do you have in mind?" Amelia asked, leaning forward, now fully engaged. "He is coming to my home on Monday to have me sign the deed over to him," Beatrice said. "He believes I have agreed. He will be expecting a surrender. I want to give him a route." For the next hour, they became co-conspirators, architects of an ingenious legal counteroffensive. Amelia explained the power and permanence of an irrevocable trust. It was a legal fortress. Once assets were placed inside it, they were protected from creditors, from lawsuits, and from the whims of disgruntled family members. We can create a trust with your grandchildren as the sole beneficiaries, Amelia explained, her mind racing. You would be the lifetime trustee, allowing you to live in and manage the home until you pass. You can name your daughter Sarah as the successor trustee to manage it for the children afterward. And Richard? Beatrice asked. We can write a clause that explicitly excludes him from ever controlling or benefiting from the trust. It would be airtight, Amelia said, a predatory gleam in her eye. She loved this. It was legally sound, morally just, and breathtakingly clever. But how do I get him to sign it? Beatrice asked. He will bring his own papers. He will, Amelia agreed, and he will be so focused on your signature, on his victory, that he won't be paying attention to the document itself. We will draft our trust declaration to look as visually similar as possible to a standard deed transfer. Same font, similar layout. You will have both sets of papers on a cluttered table. In the moment, you will make the swap. Sleight of hand, Beatrice murmured, a small, daring smile touching her lips. Precisely, Amelia said. He's bringing a notary, which is perfect. The notary's job is not to read the document, but to verify the identity of the signatory. Richard will hand him the paper, the one you signed, and the notary will stamp it, none the wiser. By the time Richard files it, it will be a legally executed, notarized declaration of the very trust that cuts him out completely. Beatrice felt a thrill run through her. It was audacious, brilliant, and deeply satisfying. It wasn't just a defensive move. It was an act of profound, maternal justice. She was not just saving her home. She was securing her grandchildren's future from their own father's folly. Draft the papers, Amelia, Beatrice said, her voice resonating with newfound power. Make them beautiful. The weekend was a masterclass in performance art. Beatrice understood that for the deception to work, Richard had to be utterly convinced of her decline. Her performance couldn't begin on Monday morning. It had to be seated, the ground prepared for his assumptions to take root. On Saturday afternoon, she made a phone call to her neighbor, Martha Gable, a woman whose tongue was connected directly to the neighborhood grapevine. Martha. It's Bea, she said, pitching her voice to a higher, more fragile register. I am so sorry to bother you, dear, but I just can't seem to figure out this dreadful remote control. Harold always handled it. It has so many buttons. I'm just trying to watch the gardening show, and I seem to have turned on a Spanish game show. Oh, you poor dear. Martha cooed, taking the bait hook, line, and sinker. Don't you worry a bit. I'll be right over. Martha spent 20 minutes explaining the simple functions of the remote control to a patiently confused Beatrice. As she left, she patted Beatrice's hand. You really should let Richard help you more, dear. This big house is a lot to handle. I know, Beatrice sighed wistfully. He is such a good boy, he worries so. By Saturday evening, the story was already making the rounds. Poor Beatrice Vance can't even work her own television. It's a blessing her son is stepping in. Meanwhile, across town, Richard and Susan were celebrating their impending victory. They sat at an upscale restaurant, a bottle of expensive champagne between them. To the next chapter, Richard said, raising his glass. To solvency. I'll drink to that, Susan said, her relief palpable. I've already been looking at realtors. The commission on a house in that neighborhood, it will be life-changing. We can pay off everything. The credit cards, the loan, we can even take that trip to Italy we've always dreamed of. And Mom will be so much happier, Richard added, the lie sliding easily from his tongue. He had repeated it so many times, he was beginning to believe it himself. She'll have no maintenance to worry about, no stairs, just a simple, easy life. We're doing the right thing, Susie, for everyone. I know, she said, squeezing his hand. I just feel a little guilty about the grandkids thing. It felt harsh. It was necessary, Richard said firmly. It was the only way to make her see reason. Once she's settled in her new place and sees how much easier her life is, she'll thank us. And the kids will have their grandma back, happy and safe. Their self-deception was complete, a comforting blanket they had woven to shield themselves from the ugliness of their own actions. On Sunday evening, Beatrice sat alone at her large dining room table. The house was silent. To her left lay the deed transfer document she knew Richard would bring, a sample copy Amelia had procured. To her right lay the trust declaration Amelia had drafted, its dense legal text a shield of protection. She picked them up, feeling their weight, comparing their layout. They were remarkably similar. She practiced the motion, sliding one paper out from under a stack of magazines, while sliding the other into its place. A simple, fluid movement. Her hands, which had trembled with feigned weakness just 2 days before, were now steady and sure. Her eyes fell on the photograph of Harold on the mantelpiece. He was smiling, his eyes crinkling at the corners. She looked at his image and felt a profound sense of communion, as if he were there with her, lending her his strength. "Well, Harold," she whispered into the quiet of the room, "you always said to protect our nest. Tomorrow I do just that. Our boy has lost his way, and I must do this to save his children from his folly. I hope you understand." She felt no fear. She felt no doubt. She felt only the cold, clear certainty of a mother about to protect her young. The trap was set. The stage was dressed. All that was left was for the lead actor to walk on and play his part. Vea said. Tess. Here is the next major installment of the story, covering the pivotal signing and the immediate, explosive aftermath. Monday dawned gray and overcast, the sky a mirror of Beatrice's somber, calculated mood. She dressed carefully in a soft, lavender-colored cardigan, a color she knew made her look frail, and deliberately dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief until they were slightly red-rimmed. She moved about the house, her steps slow and shuffling, a stark contrast to the firm, purposeful stride of the day before. The dining room table was the heart of her stage, a controlled chaos of old magazines, a half-finished crossword puzzle, her sewing basket with threads spilling out, and 2 neat stacks of mail. Amidst this clutter, there was just enough space to sign a document. At precisely 11 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Beatrice took a deep, steadying breath, summoning the character she was about to play one last time. She opened the door to Richard, Susan, and a harried-looking man with a stained tie and a worn briefcase, whom she correctly identified as the notary, Mr. Davies. "Mom," Richard said, his voice brisk, all pretense of sympathy gone now that victory was at hand. "We're here. This is Mr. Davies, the notary I told you about. He'll make everything official." "Hello, Mr. Davies," Beatrice murmured, not quite meeting his eye. "Please, come in." They bypassed the living room and went straight to the dining room table, the designated site of execution. Richard, with an air of great importance, cleared a small space in the clutter and produced his documents from a pristine leather briefcase. The contrast between his organized efficiency and her staged disarray was stark. "Okay, Mom, let's get this done," he said, spreading the deed transfer papers before her. "It's all very straightforward. This page transfers the property title to me and Susan. You just need to sign on the line at the bottom. Mr. Davies will handle the rest." Beatrice slowly lowered herself into a chair, her movements stiff with feigned reluctance. She picked up the top page, her hand trembling convincingly. "It all looks so final," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. 40 years, Richard. 40 years in this house. Your father built that bookshelf with his own 2 hands." She gestured vaguely toward the living room. "I know, Mom. And it's a lovely bookshelf," Richard said, his patience wearing thin. He wanted the signature, not a trip down memory lane. "This is for the best. Think of how much easier things will be." "Will they?" Beatrice asked, looking up at him, her eyes wide and pleading. "The apartment you picked out, does it get much sun?" "I do so love the morning sun in my kitchen." Susan, seeing Richard's growing impatience, stepped in. "It has a very nice, big window, Bea," she lied smoothly. Amelia's research had revealed the apartment faced a brick wall. "You'll love it. And the children?" Beatrice's voice cracked, and this time, the emotion was not entirely an act. The thought of their bright faces was the fuel for her resolve. "You promise, Richard? You promise I won't lose them?" Richard's jaw tightened. This was the final hurdle. "Mom, we've been over this. Of course you'll see them. We'll bring them to visit you at the new apartment all the time. Now, please, just sign." He pushed the pen towards her. "Womu." This was the moment. Beatrice reached for the pen, but her hand snagged the edge of her sewing basket, sending a spool of red thread tumbling onto the floor. "Oh, dear me, how clumsy," she murmured. As Richard and Susan instinctively glanced down at the rolling spool, and as Mr. Davies looked impatiently at his watch, Beatrice's left hand, hidden from their view by the clutter, moved with a speed and precision that belied her frail persona. In one fluid motion, she slid the deed transfer document from beneath her right hand, replacing it with the trust declaration she had concealed under a copy of Home and Garden. The entire swap took less than 2 seconds. By the time Richard looked up, the new document was in place, its appearance nearly identical to the one it had replaced. She picked up the pen. With a final sorrowful sigh that seemed to wrench itself from the depths of her soul, she leaned over the paper. Her signature was shaky, the script of a woman defeated. But as she completed the E in Vance, she added the tiny, almost invisible loop at the end, the secret signal for Amelia. "There," she said, her voice barely a whisper as she set down the pen. "It's done." A wave of palpable relief washed over Richard. He broke into a wide, triumphant grin. He snatched up the paper before the ink was fully dry. "Great, Mom. You did the right thing, Mr. Davies?" The notary, who had been staring out the window, was jolted back to attention. "Ah, yes." He took the document from Richard, glanced at the signature, asked Beatrice to confirm her identity, and then, with a heavy, satisfying thump, he embossed the page with his official seal and signed his name. He had just officially notarized the very trust that invalidated his client's entire purpose for being there. "Excellent," Richard declared, carefully placing the notarized document into his briefcase as if it were a holy relic. "We'll file this with the county clerk this afternoon. A realtor will be calling you tomorrow to schedule a time to assess the property." He and Susan bustled towards the door, their mission accomplished. At the threshold, Richard paused and turned back, offering a final piece of condescending comfort. "You'll see, Mom, this is the start of a whole new, easier life for you. You'll thank us one day." Beatrice simply nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek. It was a tear of profound, righteous victory. She waited until she heard their car pull away before she moved. The transformation was instantaneous. She rose from her chair, her back straight, her movements crisp. The frail, confused woman vanished. She walked to the dining room table, gathered up the real deed transfer papers and slid them into a folder. Then she picked up the phone and dialed Amelia Albright. "Amelia, it's Beatrice," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Phase 2 is complete. The eagle is in the nest, and the package has been signed, sealed, and delivered by the enemy himself." Richard felt like he was floating as he drove away from his mother's house. The notarized document was a warm, heavy presence in the briefcase on the passenger seat. It was the key to everything. The solution. He had done it. He had navigated the tricky emotional landscape of his mother's decline, and had emerged victorious, securing not only his own future but hers as well. He was a good son. A responsible man. "We should call the realtor now," Susan said from the passenger seat, already scrolling through contacts on her phone. "No point in waiting. The sooner we get it listed, the sooner we can close." "Absolutely," Richard agreed, a broad grin splitting his face. "But first, a stop at Gerald's office. I want to see the look on his face when I tell him we pulled it off without a hitch. He can file it with the county today. I want it official." They arrived at Gerald Finch's office radiating success. Richard strode in, placed his briefcase on the lawyer's desk with a flourish, and pulled out the notarized document. "Mission accomplished, Gerald," Richard announced proudly. "Signed, sealed, and notarized. Not a single problem." She was emotional, of course, but she understood it was for the best. "File this today. Let's get the ball rolling." Gerald, ever the professional, took the document. "Congratulations, Richard. Glad to hear it went smoothly." He unfolded the paper, his eyes scanning the top as a matter of course. His professional smile flickered. He paused, leaned closer, and read the title again. "Richard," he began, his voice losing its confident tone. "What exactly am I looking at here?" "The deed transfer. What else would it be?" Richard said, an edge of irritation in his voice. "Well, for starters, it's titled Declaration of the Harold and Beatrice Vance Grandchildren's Trust," Gerald said, his face paling as he continued to read. His eyes widened. "An irrevocable trust, my God." "A what?" Susan asked, leaning forward. Richard snatched the paper from Gerald's hand, his heart beginning to pound with a sudden sick dread. His eyes raced across the page, the familiar legal formatting now seeming alien and menacing. He saw the names Leo Vance, Chloe Vance. He saw the phrases sole beneficiaries, lifetime rights retained by Beatrice Vance. And then he saw the clause, a dagger plunged straight into the heart of his plans. Richard Vance is hereby explicitly and permanently barred from acting as trustee, beneficiary, or agent of this trust. The room seemed to shrink, the air growing thick and heavy. A roaring sound filled his ears. He saw it in a flash of sickening clarity. The cluttered table, the rolling spool of thread, the brief moment of distraction. His mother's tear-streaked face, which he had interpreted as sorrow, now looked like the pinnacle of mockery. He hadn't seen a grieving mother. He had seen a brilliant actress taking a bow. "No," he whispered, the word a gasp. "No, no, no, this isn't possible." He frantically flipped through the pages, looking for the deed transfer he had brought, but it wasn't there. This was it. This was the only document. And at the bottom, clear as day, was his mother's shaky signature and the heavy embossed seal of the notary he had hired. "She swapped them," Gerald said, his voice a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. "Right under your nose, she swapped the documents. Richard, this is legally binding. You had it notarized yourself. You can't just undo this." The initial shock gave way to a surge of pure volcanic rage. It was a fury so intense it made him physically tremble. He had been tricked. Conned. By his own mother. The frail, doddering woman he had planned to save had instead flawlessly, ruthlessly annihilated him. The humiliation was a physical burn, searing his pride to ash. "Fix it!" Richard roared, slamming his fist on the mahogany desk, making both Gerald and Susan jump. "I don't care what it costs, I don't care what you have to do. Sue her. Have her committed. That is my house. She can't do this to me." Gerald Finch leaned back, holding his hands up as if to ward off his client's rage. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by the grim visage of a man staring into a legal abyss. "Richard, listen to me," he said, his voice firm. "You don't understand. To challenge this, we'd have to prove she was mentally incompetent when she signed it. But the woman who just did this to you is a chess grandmaster, not a confused old lady. She didn't just outmaneuver you. She used your own arrogance, your own notary, your own plan as the weapon against you. She didn't just build a fortress, Richard. She tricked you into building it for her." Richard stared at his lawyer, his chest heaving, his mind refusing to accept the totality of his defeat. He had walked into that house a conqueror and had walked out a fool. His mother hadn't just closed a door in his face. She had locked it, bolted it, and thrown away the key, leaving him trapped outside in the ruins of his own making. Pumachine. Of course. Here is the next major installment of the story, focusing on the drawing of battle lines, the arrival of a key ally, and the first stages of the legal war. The day after Richard's catastrophic discovery, Beatrice sat once again across the polished table from Amelia Albright. The mood was different now. The thrill of a successful operation had been replaced by the grim reality of impending war. "He will not let this go," Beatrice said, her voice calm but devoid of any illusion. "His pride has been wounded far more deeply than his finances, and that is a much more dangerous injury." "I agree," Amelia said, tapping a pen on a fresh legal pad. "Gerald Finch will have explained to him that his position is almost indefensible, but that won't stop him. A lawsuit is the only way he can even pretend to have any power left, so we must anticipate his every move." Amelia began to sketch out Richard's likely strategy on the pad, her writing sharp and precise. Attack 1, competency. They will petition the court to have you declared mentally incompetent. They will allege that you were incapable of understanding the complex legal document you signed. They'll portray you as a confused, doddering woman. "A role I played for him quite effectively," Beatrice noted with a wry, humorless smile. "Too effectively, perhaps," Amelia countered. "He will use your own performance against you. He'll tell the court you were forgetting things, that you were overwhelmed." Attack 2, undue influence. This is where it gets ugly. He will claim that someone else manipulated you into this course of action. He will almost certainly name your daughter Sarah as the primary culprit. Beatrice's expression hardened. "He would drag his own sister into this?" "He will drag anyone into it if he thinks it will help him," Amelia said grimly. "He will try to paint a picture of a greedy, absentee daughter swooping in to poison you against your loving local son, who was only trying to care for you. It's a classic, ugly narrative. We need to be prepared for it." Beatrice was silent for a long moment, absorbing the calculated cruelty of her son's impending actions. She had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that his discovery of the trust might lead to a moment of shocked introspection. Instead, it was clear he was simply reloading for a second, more vicious assault. "So, we defend against these attacks?" Beatrice asked. "No," Amelia said, leaning forward, her eyes glinting with a fighter's light. "We don't just defend. We attack first. We redefine the narrative before he gets a chance to. We file our own petition immediately. We will petition the court for a temporary restraining order against Richard on the grounds of elder abuse and coercion." "Elder abuse?" The words sounded harsh and alien to Beatrice. "That is what it is," Amelia insisted. "Using threats and emotional manipulation to attempt to extract financial assets from an elder is a textbook definition. His ultimatum regarding your grandchildren is our cornerstone. We will make him the defendant in the eyes of the court. We will frame this entire conflict not as a dispute over a trust, but as a mother's desperate act of self-defense against a predatory son. We control the story." As Beatrice absorbed the brilliance of the strategy, she knew there was one more crucial step she had to take, the most difficult one. When she returned home, she sat in her quiet living room for a long time before picking up the phone to call her daughter in Chicago. "Mom?" Sarah's voice, always brisk and professional, came through the line. "Is everything all right? You sound different." "I'm fine, dear," Beatrice began, but her voice wavered. She took a breath and decided that there could be no more performances, no more hiding. Only the plain, unvarnished truth. "No, that's not true. I'm not fine. Sarah, I'm in trouble. Richard is in trouble. And I have done something that will either save this family's future or shatter it completely." For the next 20 minutes, Beatrice laid out the entire story for her daughter. She left nothing out. Richard's financial ruin, the cruel ultimatum, the secret meetings with Amelia, the staged performance of senility, the document swap, the irrevocable trust that now protected the house for Leo and Chloe. She spoke without emotion, presenting the facts as clearly as she could. Mere plans. The silence on the other end of the line was long and heavy. Beatrice could picture her daughter, standing in her sterile Chicago apartment after a long shift in the ER, processing a level of family dysfunction that was more chaotic than any trauma bay. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice a strange mix of shock and something else Beatrice couldn't quite identify. "Let me get this straight. Sarah said slowly. Richard tried to blackmail you for the house, using his own kids. So you went full Matahari, tricked him into notarizing a secret trust document that disinherited him and gave the house to his children, and now he's about to sue you, claiming you're insane and that I'm the evil mastermind who put you up to it? That is an accurate summary, yes, Beatrice said quietly. There was another pause, and then a sound that Beatrice had not expected. It was a laugh. Not a laugh of mirth, but a short, sharp bark of disbelief and awe. "Oh my God, Mom," Sarah said, a note of wonder in her voice. I've underestimated you my entire life." "I did what I had to do for his children," Beatrice said softly. "No, Mom. You did what you had to do for yourself. And for Dad's memory. And for all of us." Sarah's voice turned hard, the ER doctor's decisiveness kicking in. "Okay. He's gonna come at you with everything. You can't do this alone. I'm booking the first flight out tomorrow morning. I'll be there by afternoon." "Sarah, you don't have to." "Don't you dare tell me I don't have to," Sarah cut in, her voice fierce with loyalty. "He made me the villain in his story? Fine. I'll play the part. He wants a war? He's about to get one on two fronts." Sarah arrived the next afternoon, a whirlwind of focused energy. She hugged her mother tightly at the door, a hug that conveyed not pity, but solidarity. She dropped her bags and immediately began to assess the situation, her sharp, diagnostic eyes taking in every detail of the house, of her mother's posture, of the quiet determination that now radiated from her. That evening, they sat up late in the kitchen, a pot of tea between them, the years of distance melting away under the heat of the immediate crisis. They talked for hours, filling in the gaps that had grown between them. Sarah spoke of the relentless pressure of her job, the loneliness of the city. Beatrice spoke of her own quiet loneliness, of her pride in Sarah's accomplishments, and of the growing, gnawing fear she'd had for Richard. "He was always like this, you know," Sarah said, staring into her cup. "Even as a kid, he wanted the biggest piece of cake, the newest bike. He could charm Dad into giving him almost anything. You were always the one who held the line." "I tried," Beatrice said sadly, "but I fear I failed him somewhere along the way. That I didn't teach him the difference between wanting and earning." "That's not on you, Mom," Sarah said firmly. "That's on him. You gave us both the same foundation. I chose to build on it. He chose to take out loans against it." The conversation was a painful but necessary excavation of their family's history, exposing the fault lines that had led to this earthquake. By the time they went to bed, they were no longer just mother and daughter. They were allies, united in a common cause. The first salvo from Richard's side arrived 2 days later, delivered by a grim-faced courier. The thick envelope contained the official petition to the court. It was even uglier than Amelia had predicted. The document was a poisonous tapestry woven from half-truths and outright lies. It detailed Beatrice's alarming memory lapses, her erratic emotional states, and her inability to manage basic household tasks. It painted Richard as a long-suffering, devoted son, whose every attempt to help had been thwarted by her stubbornness. Then came the attack on Sarah. It accused her of being a, quote, financially motivated interloper, who had systematically poisoned her mother against her brother, in order to, quote, seize control of the family's primary asset. It requested an immediate injunction to bar Sarah from seeing or speaking to Beatrice, pending the outcome of the case. Reading it, Sarah felt a cold rage settle over her. He's not just trying to win, he's trying to isolate you completely. He wants to leave you with no one. Beatrice folded the papers calmly. Then let's show him what happens when he pushes a family of strong women into a corner. They drove to Amelia's office immediately. The 3 women gathered in the conference room, the petition spread out on the table like a declaration of war. Amelia read through it, her expression hardening with each page. "This is sloppy and desperate," she declared, her voice laced with contempt. "He's throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." The request to bar Sarah from seeing you is particularly odious and will be denied outright by any sane judge. Now, we respond. For the next 2 hours, they worked on their counterpetition. It was a powerful fusion of their three strengths. Beatrice provided the heart, dictating a sworn affidavit that recounted Richard's cruel ultimatum in painstaking, emotional detail. Her words were not those of a confused woman, but of a heartbroken mother pushed to the brink. Sarah provided the clinical, professional backbone. As a physician, she drafted her own affidavit, attesting to her mother's clear and consistent cognitive health, citing specific conversations and interactions. She methodically dismantled the notion that Beatrice was frail or forgetful, framing her actions not as erratic, but as, quote, a logical and calculated response to a significant emotional and financial threat. Amelia provided the legal steel. She wove their testimonies into a powerful legal document, a petition for a restraining order that was both emotionally compelling and legally irrefutable. It concluded by demanding that Richard's quote, frivolous, malicious, and retaliatory lawsuit be dismissed with prejudice. As Beatrice signed her name to the affidavit, her hand was rock steady. She looked at her daughter and her lawyer, two brilliant, fierce women standing by her side. Richard had intended to isolate her, to leave her alone and vulnerable. Instead, he had forged an alliance more powerful than he could possibly imagine. The battle was just beginning, but Beatrice already knew, with absolute certainty, how it was going to end. The filing of the dueling petitions sent ripples through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Beatrice's neighborhood. Lawsuits were not common here, and a lawsuit pitting a son against his own mother was the stuff of hushed, horrified gossip. Beatrice, who had always valued her privacy, now found herself the reluctant subject of intense speculation. Her daily walks to the post office or trips to the local market became exercises in navigating a sea of pitying glances and whispered conversations. Her chief antagonist was, unsurprisingly, Martha Gable from across the street. Martha had fully embraced Richard's narrative and now saw herself as a key witness to a tragedy. She would watch from her window as Beatrice tended her garden, shaking her head and clucking her tongue to anyone who would listen. One afternoon, as Beatrice was pruning her prize-winning roses, Martha ambled across the street, her face a mask of cloying concern. "Oh, Bea, you poor thing," she began, not waiting for a greeting. "I heard what Richard is having to do. It must be so difficult. But it's for your own good. He told me himself. He's just trying to protect you from that daughter of yours. It's a shame when they get ideas in their heads." Beatrice straightened up slowly, pulling off a leather glove. She looked Martha directly in the eye, her gaze clear and unwavering. "Martha," she said, her voice polite but edged with steel, "my son threatened to keep my grandchildren from me unless I signed my home over to him. My daughter flew across the country to stand by my side. If you are determined to choose a side in a battle you know nothing about, I suggest you think carefully about which army you wish to join." Martha Gable was so taken aback by the directness of the response that she could only stammer a reply and retreat back across the street, her primary source of gossip having suddenly refused to play the victim. The encounter was draining, but it was also clarifying. Beatrice realized that silence could be misinterpreted as weakness. She would not hide. Couple. Not everyone was an antagonist. Her oldest friend in the neighborhood, a retired history professor named Arthur Jennings, came to her door the next day with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I've heard the chatter," he said, skipping the platitudes. "And I know you, Beatrice. I also know your son. He always was a boy who wanted the world on a silver platter. I'm here to tell you that if you need anything, a character witness, someone to testify to your soundness of mind, or just someone to drink this rather excellent Merlot with, you have my unconditional support." The gesture of simple, unquestioning friendship moved Beatrice to tears. She understood then that her community was not lost. It was simply being tested. The most significant test, however, came a week later. As per the legal proceedings, she was required to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation by a court-appointed, neutral party. Richard's case, however flimsy, hinged on the remote possibility that this doctor would find some hint of cognitive decline. Beatrice entered the office of Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman with a calm demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. For 3 hours, Dr. Reed guided Beatrice through a comprehensive evaluation. She didn't just ask rote questions. She engaged Beatrice in deep, philosophical conversation. "Your son alleges that your decision to create this trust was not financially sound," Dr. Reed said at one point. "He claims it diminishes the potential value of your estate." "My son believes that the only measure of a thing's value is its market price," Beatrice responded thoughtfully. "My late husband and I built that house with our own hands. We raised 2 children within its walls. We celebrated anniversaries and mourned losses. Our neighbors' children have played in our yard. Its value to me is not in its sale price, it's in its continuity. Is it financially sound to protect a legacy? Is it financially sound to provide a stable future for one's grandchildren when their own father cannot? I believe it is the soundest investment a person can make." Dr. Reed probed her memory, asking for details about her childhood, her marriage, her relationship with each of her children. Beatrice answered honestly, her recollections rich with detail and emotional nuance. She spoke of her pride in Sarah's fierce independence and her sorrow at Richard's deepening entitlement. "You performed a role for your son," Dr. Reed observed. "That of a confused, helpless woman. Why did you believe that was necessary?" "Because for the last several years, any time I expressed an opinion that ran contrary to my son's, he would attribute it to my age or my sentimentality," Beatrice explained. "He stopped seeing me as a person with valid thoughts and desires. He saw me as a problem to be managed. When someone has already decided you are incompetent, the only power you have left is to use their prejudice against them. He wanted a confused old woman, so I gave him one. It was the only way he would lower his guard enough for me to protect myself." At the end of the long session, Dr. Reed put down her pen and looked at Beatrice with an expression of profound respect. "Mrs. Vance," she said, "my official report will be sent to the court. It will state, in no uncertain terms, that you possess a formidable intellect and a remarkable clarity of thought. It will conclude that your actions were not the result of confusion, but the result of a sophisticated and deeply rational strategy undertaken to protect yourself from what you correctly perceived as a significant threat." Unofficially, Dr. Reed leaned forward slightly. "It's a shame this isn't a chess match. You'd have had him in checkmate in 6 moves. When Amelia Albright received the report, she called Beatrice and Sarah immediately, her voice triumphant. She read excerpts aloud, her words a vindication of everything Beatrice had done. Richard's primary legal weapon had not just been neutralized, it had been melted down and reforged into a shield for Beatrice. The foundation of his case had crumbled to dust. For Richard and Susan, the news of the psychiatric report was a body blow. They sat in Gerald Finch's office, the atmosphere thick with the stench of defeat. "It's catastrophic," Gerald said bluntly. He saw no point in sugarcoating it. "The report doesn't just say she's competent, it practically paints her as a strategic genius. Any judge reading this will see our petition as completely baseless. It undermines our entire position." "So what do we do?" Richard asked, his voice hollow. "We can try to argue the undue influence angle with Sarah," Gerald said, though his heart wasn't in it. "But without the competency claim, it's weak. It looks like sour grapes. It looks like you're just angry your sister is on your mother's side." "She is on her mother's side," Richard exploded. "She's turned her against me." "Or," Gerald countered, his patience finally snapping, "your mother and sister have simply allied against a common threat. You, Richard. That's how the court is going to see it." The ride home was silent and tense. The world Richard had built was unraveling thread by thread. The lawsuit was costing a fortune, a constant drain on their already depleted accounts. The second mortgage payments were becoming impossible to meet. He had received a formal notice of foreclosure on his own home just last week. The dream of selling his mother's house was supposed to fix everything. Instead, the fight for it was accelerating his ruin. That evening, the cracks in his marriage, which had been slowly forming, finally split wide open. Susan was looking at their latest credit card statement, her face pale. "It was declined today, Richard," she said, her voice flat. "At the grocery store. My card. It was declined. I had to leave a full cart of groceries sitting there. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? I'll transfer some money, he said evasively, not looking at her. Transfer what money? She shot back, her voice rising with a hysterical edge. There is no money. We are broke. We are losing our house. We are racking up legal bills we can't pay. Also, you can continue this vendetta against your own mother. It is not a vendetta, he roared. It's about what's right, what she did to me. What you did, Susan interrupted, her voice trembling with a rage that had been building for months. You were the one who threatened her. You were the one who was so arrogant you couldn't see she was 10 steps ahead of you. I went along with it, Richard. God help me, I went along with it because I was scared and I trusted you. But I see it now, I see all of it. This isn't about principle, this is about your ego. You can't stand that she beat you. She didn't beat me, he snarled. This isn't over. Yes, it is, Susan cried, tears of frustration and despair streaming down her face. It's over. And we've lost. And you know what we've lost, Richard? Not just the money. We've lost your mother. And we are losing our children. Leo asked me why he can't see Grandma. He thinks it's his fault. He thinks he did something wrong. We did this to him. You did this to him. The accusation, so raw and so true, finally pierced through Richard's armor of denial. He looked at his weeping wife, at the foreclosure notice on the kitchen counter, at the shambles of their life, and for the first time, he felt the crushing weight of his own choices. He had gambled everything on the belief that he was smarter, stronger, and more deserving than his mother. He had lost. And the cost was infinitely greater than a house. Despite the crumbling foundation of his case, Richard, spurred on by a toxic mix of pride and desperation, refused to withdraw the petition. Gerald Finch, contractually obligated to proceed, moved on to the next phase: depositions. It was a fishing expedition, a last-ditch effort to find some scrap of testimony he could twist to his advantage. He decided to depose Sarah first, hoping to rattle her and portray her as a manipulative interloper. They gathered again in the sterile conference room. Sarah, in her simple, professional work attire, looked completely unfazed. Amelia sat beside her, calm and observant. Gerald began by trying to establish Sarah's distance from her mother. Dr. Vance, you live in Chicago, correct? 1,000 miles away. How often would you say you visited your mother prior to these events? Once a year? Twice? I visited whenever my schedule as an emergency room physician allowed, Sarah answered coolly. And I spoke with my mother on the phone at least twice a week. Unlike my brother, I don't measure my familial affection in billable hours or geographic proximity. The jab landed. Gerald flushed slightly and changed tactics. When your mother informed you of her plan to create this trust, what was your reaction? My reaction was one of profound relief, Sarah said. Relief? Gerald feigned surprise. Not shock? Not concern that your elderly mother was engaging in such a complex and deceptive legal maneuver? No, relief, Sarah repeated firmly. I was relieved that my mother, who I know to be an intelligent and resourceful woman, had found a way to protect herself from my brother, who I know to be a financially desperate and morally compromised man. I was relieved that she was taking steps to protect the future of her grandchildren, a future my brother was clearly willing to sacrifice for his own short-term gain. Gerald tried to paint her as financially motivated. This trust, as the successor trustee, you now hold a position of considerable power over a multi-million-dollar asset, don't you? I hold a position of considerable responsibility, Sarah corrected him, her voice sharp. A responsibility to honor my mother's wishes and protect my niece and nephew's legacy. It is a duty, Mr. Finch, not a prize. I know that may be a difficult concept for your client to grasp. The deposition was a disaster for Richard. Sarah was unflappable, intelligent, and articulate. Every attempt to portray her as a villain only served to highlight Richard's own monstrous behavior. The final deposition was of Beatrice herself. Richard insisted on being present, sitting in the corner of the room, his eyes boring into his mother, hoping his presence would intimidate her. It was a grave miscalculation. Gerald Finch approached Beatrice with a gentler, more condescending tone, trying to evoke the confused woman he so desperately needed her to be. Mrs. Vance, this is all very complex, isn't it? All this legal language. Are you sure you understood everything Ms. Albright was telling you? Beatrice looked at him, then let her gaze drift to her son in the corner. I understood perfectly, Mr. Finch, she said, her voice soft but clear. I understood that my son came to my home and used the deepest love a grandparent has as a weapon to try and take everything from me. I understood that my choices were to be rendered homeless and heartbroken, or to fight back. Is that concept too complex for you to understand? Gerald, flustered, tried one last desperate gambit. And this deception, lying to your own son, pretending to be frail and confused. Did you feel no guilt in deceiving him like that? Beatrice was silent for a long moment. She looked directly at Richard, her expression not of anger, but of profound maternal sorrow. Mr. Finch, she said, her voice resonating with a lifetime of love and pain. A mother's life is filled with deceptions for the good of her children. We tell them there is a Santa Claus to protect their innocence. We tell them their terrible drawings are masterpieces to protect their confidence. We hide our own fears and pains to protect their sense of security. My son had become a danger to his own children and to himself. The deception I engaged in was one last, painful act of motherhood. I was trying to protect my family from the one person I never thought I would have to, my own son. Her testimony hung in the air, irrefutable and heartbreaking. Richard, sitting in the corner, finally broke. He buried his face in his hands, not in anger, but in what looked, for the first time, like pure, unadulterated shame. The war was over. He had lost. The depositions were the death knell for Richard's case, and Gerald Finch knew it. Every witness, including his own, had only served to build a pedestal for Beatrice's integrity, while digging the hole for his client deeper. The legal fees were astronomical, and Richard's ability to pay them had evaporated. In a stark, brutal meeting, Gerald laid out the only path forward. It's over, Richard. There is no scenario in which we win. Zero. Our only option now is to beg for a settlement, to try and salvage some microscopic scrap from this bonfire you've created. We need to send your mother an offer. Richard, gaunt and hollow-eyed, could only nod. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the dull terror of impending ruin. But even in defeat, his pride and entitlement flickered. Fine, he croaked. But I want visitation with my kids, and she has to help with our debts. It's the least she can do. The settlement offer that arrived at Beatrice's home a few days later was a document of such stunning delusion that Amelia Albright had to read it twice to be sure it wasn't a parody. They gathered at the dining room table, Beatrice, Sarah, and Amelia, the same table where the fateful signature had taken place. Amelia summarized the terms with unconcealed contempt. Richard is offering to graciously drop his baseless lawsuit. In return, he demands the following. First, that you agree to immediately dissolve the grandchildren's trust. Second, upon the future sale of the home after your death, he is to be the sole beneficiary. Third, from that future sale, he wants an immediate advance of $200,000 to solve his current debt crisis. And fourth, in exchange for all of this, he will agree to a court-mediated visitation schedule with Leo and Chloe. He is literally trying to sell you back access to your own grandchildren. Sarah just shook her head, a look of weary disgust on her face. Even now, even after everything, he still thinks he's in charge. He thinks he has something to bargain with. Beatrice felt a profound stillness settle over her. The offer was not just an insult. It was a final, definitive diagnostic tool. It proved that her son still did not understand the reality of his position. He was not a penitent. He was merely a failed conqueror trying to negotiate better terms of surrender. There will be no negotiation, Beatrice said, her voice as calm and final as a winter frost. Amelia, please draft our official response. It will not be a counteroffer. It will be a list of our terms. We will inform Mr. Finch that we categorically reject their offer and that we are proceeding to the final hearing, where we will be petitioning the court for the following. She paused, looking at her daughter, who gave a firm, supportive nod. First, Beatrice continued, we will ask the court to dismiss Richard's petition with prejudice. Second, we will ask for our restraining order to be granted. Third, we will ask that Richard be ordered to pay every cent of the legal fees I have been forced to incur in my defense. Fourth, Supervised family counseling for him and his wife will not be a request. It will be a court-mandated prerequisite for any future discussion about visitation. And fifth, I want a formal written apology from my son to be submitted to the court, acknowledging the emotional distress and coercion he is engaged in. Amelia Albright's pen flew across her legal pad. This was not law, this was poetry. It was a complete reversal of power, a demand for accountability so total it left no room for argument. "And if he refuses?" Amelia asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then he will have his day in court," Beatrice said, "and he will hear a judge grant every single one of our terms anyway. The time for deals is over. Now is the time for consequences." The final hearing was less a battle than a formal surrender ceremony. The courtroom was cold and intimidating, but Beatrice felt none of the fear Richard had hoped to inspire. She sat tall, between Sarah and Amelia, a study in quiet dignity. Across the aisle, Richard looked like a ghost, his expensive suit hanging on him like a shroud. Judge Eleanor Wong entered, her presence commanding immediate silence. She took her seat, surveyed the room with sharp, intelligent eyes, and fixed her gaze upon Richard's lawyer. "Mr. Finch," she began, her voice devoid of warmth, "your client's petition to have his mother declared incompetent rests on claims of cognitive decline and undue influence. I have in front of me a 30-page report from the court-appointed geriatric psychiatrist, which states that Mrs. Vance possesses, quote, a formidable intellect and a remarkable clarity of thought. I have the deposition of your own witness, Mrs. Gable, who testified that Mrs. Vance was lucid and resolute, and I have the deposition of Mrs. Vance herself, which this court found to be one of the most compelling and articulate testimonies it has had the misfortune of needing to hear. Given this mountain of evidence to the contrary, would you like to explain to me why you have not withdrawn this insulting and frivolous petition?" Gerald Finch, pale and sweating, rose to his feet. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Vance, he acted from a place of love and concern. He saw things that worried him, and perhaps he overreacted, but his intentions were honorable." Amelia Albright rose for her rebuttal. "Your Honor, intentions are irrelevant when actions are abusive. Mr. Vance's honorable intentions involved threatening to sever his mother's relationship with her grandchildren, a threat he made in writing. His, quote, love and concern involved a calculated plan to seize her primary asset to solve his own financial crisis. The plaintiff in this case is not the concerned son. The plaintiff is the predator who was outmaneuvered by his intended prey. Mrs. Vance did not act out of confusion, she acted out of courage. She asks this court not for vengeance, but for justice and for peace." Judge Wong listened intently, her fingers steepled. When Amelia sat down, the judge turned her full attention to Richard, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "For decades, our legal system has been misused by people like you to strip elderly parents of their autonomy under the guise of, quote, care. You see their assets as your inheritance, their homes as your waiting rooms. You interpret their desire for independence as stubbornness, their differing values as senility. You came to your mother's home not with an offer of help, but with a demand for her surrender, backed by the most cruel and intimate threat you could devise." She let the words hang in the silent courtroom. "Your mother did not just defeat you in a legal sense, Mr. Vance. She exposed the moral bankruptcy of your position. She has taught this court, and hopefully you, a valuable lesson. An elderly person's worth is not defined by their assets. Their right to self-determination does not expire with age, and love, when it is used as a tool of control, ceases to be love at all." Her voice rose, filling the room with an unassailable authority. Therefore, the court rules as follows. The petition filed by Mr. Vance is dismissed with extreme prejudice. The restraining order petitioned by Mrs. Vance is granted for a period of 2 years. Mr. Vance is ordered to reimburse his mother for all legal fees related to this case within 90 days. Furthermore, I am ordering Mr. Richard Vance and Mrs. Susan Vance to attend a minimum of 1 year of court-monitored family and financial counseling. Any future petitions regarding visitation with the minor children will only be considered after successful completion of this counseling and a positive report from the assigned therapist. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell with the force of a guillotine. It was over. A complete and total victory for Beatrice. But as she watched her son slump in his chair, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs, she felt no joy, only the profound, aching cost of a war she had never wanted to fight. The verdict was not just a legal defeat, it was a detonation at the center of Richard and Susan's life. The order to pay Beatrice's legal fees, on top of their own, was the final push into an abyss of debt they could no longer escape. 2 months later, they filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The process was a public stripping away of every artifice of their former life. They sat in a sterile lawyer's office as a trustee went through their assets, their debts, their foolish expenditures. The luxury car was repossessed. The foreclosure on their house was finalized. They were forced to sell furniture, jewelry, Susan's engagement ring, anything of value to appease their creditors. The humiliation was absolute. They found a small, cramped apartment to rent in a town 20 miles away, the nicest place they could afford. The move was a grim affair. As they packed boxes, the silence between them was a thick, suffocating blanket of resentment and blame. The court-ordered counseling was their only lifeline, though at first, it felt like another punishment. In a small, quiet office, a therapist named Dr. Miller began the painstaking work of excavation. "Richard," Dr. Miller said in their third session, "you speak of your mother's actions as a betrayal, but what promise did she break?" "The promise that a parent is supposed to take care of their child," Richard burst out, his voice raw. "You are a 45-year-old man with a family of your own," Dr. Miller said gently. "At what point does a parent's duty to care for a child end, and a child's duty to care for themselves begin? Your mother raised you. She gave you every advantage. The betrayal you feel is not because she failed you. It's because she refused to enable you." For Susan, the sessions were a slow, painful path toward self-awareness. "I just stood there," she confessed in one session, tears streaming down her face. "When he threatened to take the children away, I stood right there and I said nothing. I was so scared of losing the house, the lifestyle. I was willing to let him do that to his own mother. What kind of person am I?" Slowly, painfully, the therapy began to work. Stripped of everything they had thought mattered, Richard and Susan were forced to look at what was left, each other and their children. They began to talk, really talk, for the first time in years, about their fears and their failings. After 6 months of intense counseling, Richard sat down one evening and wrote a letter. There were no lawyers, no mandates. It was just him and a blank piece of paper. He wrote and rewrote it for hours, the floor around him littered with crumpled drafts. Finally, he sealed the simple, heartfelt words in an envelope. It was not a plea. It was a confession. Beatrice read the letter in her sun-drenched kitchen. "I was a coward, and I was cruel," he had written. "I see now that you weren't taking a house from me. You were trying to give me back my soul. I don't know if I can ever earn your forgiveness, but I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to become a man worthy of being your son." Beatrice folded the letter, her tears falling onto the page. It was the first sign of life from the son she thought she had lost forever. The war was over. The long, uncertain work of peace was about to begin. 3 years later, the little house on Maple Avenue was more vibrant than ever. Beatrice, now 71, had discovered a passion for pottery, her creations lining the shelves of the bookshelf Harold had built. Her life was full, rich with friends, hobbies, and the quiet satisfaction of her hard-won peace. The grandchildren's trust was a silent, powerful guardian, growing steadily, a testament to a grandmother's love and foresight. Richard and Susan had emerged from the ashes of their bankruptcy humbled and fundamentally changed. Richard worked a steady, less glamorous job in logistics. He drove a used car and wore clothes from a department store. He had less money than he'd ever had in his adult life, but he was more present, more content. He coached Leo's soccer team. He helped Chloe with her science projects. He was, finally, a father. Joel's tapi ter car, Joel's tapi twani as Biak says. The reconciliation with Beatrice had been a slow, delicate dance. It had progressed from mediated phone calls to awkward coffees in neutral cafes. The restraining order had long since expired, replaced by a fragile, voluntary connection. On a bright, cool Saturday in October, Richard's modest sedan pulled up to the curb on Maple Avenue. It was Chloe's 10th birthday, and for the first time since the lawsuit, the entire family was celebrating together at Beatrice's home. Sarah had flown in from Chicago. She and Richard were polite, their relationship still bearing the scars of the battle. But there was a new, tentative respect between them. Beatrice watched from her porch as Leo, now a lanky 13-year-old, helped his father carry in the birthday cake. Chloe ran into the backyard to the old tire swing, her laughter echoing through the trees. Later, as they gathered around the dining room table to sing Happy Birthday, Beatrice looked at the faces around her. She saw her daughter, strong and successful. She saw her daughter-in-law, her face softer now, the hard edges of anxiety gone. She saw her grandchildren, happy and secure, unaware of the war that had been fought for their future. And she looked at Richard. He caught her eye across the flickering candles, and he gave her a small, quiet smile. It was a smile free of artifice and entitlement. It was a smile of gratitude. In that moment, Beatrice understood her true legacy. It wasn't the house, it wasn't the trust fund. It was this moment. It was the family that had been shattered and then painstakingly, imperfectly, put back together. It was the lesson, paid for at great cost, that true wealth is not what you can acquire, but what you refuse to sacrifice. She had fought for her home, but in doing so, she had given her son a chance to finally, truly come home to himself. And as Chloe blew out her candles, making a wish for the future, Beatrice Vance smiled, knowing the future was in much better hands. Beatrice's powerful story is a testament to the quiet strength that often resides where we least expect it. It serves as a profound lesson on the nature of family, respect, and the true meaning of legacy. It teaches us, first and foremost, that we must never mistake age for weakness or silence for surrender. A person's right to their own life, their own decisions, and their own home does not diminish over time. Beatrice's journey is a powerful reminder that wisdom, strategy, and courage have no expiration date. Her story also forces us to ask what love truly is. Is it controlling a person for what we believe is their own good? Or is it respecting their autonomy, even when we disagree with their choices? Richard's painful journey shows that love expressed through control is not love at all, but possession, and that true family connection can only be rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect. And finally, Beatrice's battle shows us what a legacy is truly worth. It is not measured in property values or financial portfolios, but in the principles we uphold and the values we protect. She fought not just to save a house, but to preserve a history of love, integrity, and community, a legacy she ensured would pass to her grandchildren, protected from the very greed that threatened to destroy it. It is a story that encourages us to listen more carefully to our elders, to cherish our families with empathy, and to always remember that the strongest person in the room is not always the loudest, but the one whose convictions are unshakable.